said, I'm Jerry Belich. I'm a game designer and storyteller by trade, so I do a lot of work in really interesting spaces between like the physical and the digital, including what I have here called the Choosatron, or the Choosatron Deluxe Adventure Matrix, its full title. The Choosatron is an interactive fiction game machine. And what I mean by that is it takes stories that have a branching narrative structure and it feeds those out piece by piece as the player makes choices as the narrative prints out. So if I hit a button here, this is a thermal printer, so it's completely inkless. And you just use the same thermal printer rolls that that people use in tills, like at Target. So it prints out a list of stories, and then after I select one, it prints out the first part of the narrative, and then presents me with a list of choices. Then after you read the narrative and make a choice, so in this case, there's a story called Slugfest, and it describes looking out in a garden, and it gives me some choices about taking a barefoot walk, or grabbing my gear and getting to work, or making toast. So if I hit the third button to make toast, then it describes me making the toast. So going back a little bit, I first got into electronics work about 3.5 years ago when somebody gave me an Arduino. An Arduino is a small microcontroller development board that's especially common when people are first starting out and learning about electrical engineering. It's definitely a new part of a big movement called the Maker Movement, where it's allowing a lot of people to make really new and interesting and very physical devices. I spent a lot of time thinking about different kinds of interaction, and rather than game designer, I feel more that I've always been kind of a play designer, because I don't like trying to figure out what that definition of game necessarily has to be. So when I got that Arduino, and I was trying to decide what I was going to make with this, a friend had given it to me, which is what encouraged me to do it. I was looking through all the parts online, and I came across a thermal printer and a coin acceptor, and it just struck me that I wanted to make a Choose Your Own Adventure arcade machine. I'd always loved the Choose Your Own Adventure books as a kid, or at least I loved the idea of them. I think the writing maybe, wasn't quite up to par, but the idea of giving the reader control over their destiny and a little bit of power and agency in the story, I felt was really compelling. And as a kid, I absolutely ate it up, even though it was hardly Tolkien. So when I decided to make this, I really wanted to make this for that little Jerry, that young kid that was really interested in reading different kinds of stories and having the ability to be a part of that. I also really love the engagement and the tactile nature of it. And one thing I found of taking this around to kids and adults alike is that people are really hungry for having that certain kind of tactile engagement. When we think about how we interact with things today on digital phones and tablets and touchscreens, I think there are a few things that get a little bit lost in that. That tactile feeling, the ability to feel the crinkle of the paper, is really important, because without that agency, and without kind of the weight of the choices that you have to make with something like this, and even in a paper book, is lost, because you can move back and forth, you can cheat, but here it's printed out in a completely linear nature. And the Choosatron I found is really, really useful for teaching in STEM or STEAM environments. First, you've got getting kids to read and to take in literary content again. Not to mention authors creating brand new content on all sorts of topics: educational, fantasy, science fiction. When I initially built the Choosatron, I got a lot of different authors involved. One is a bird expert and writing scientific stories about birds or about bees. Another friend wrote a story about going back in time and visiting places in history and learning about that. But what really kind of struck me is after kids interact with the Choosatron and play the Choosatron, they get encouraged to start thinking about creative writing and game design. So it turns them from consumers into creators. And I think that's a really important thing when we think about how we're using this new technology that we have today in microcontrollers and cheap components and being able to manufacture. So after getting the initial model done, I did a Kickstarter. We looked for $22,000 and ended up getting 75. Of course, when I say we, I really mean me. I had a lot of help, an incredible amount of help. But I also put a lot of weight on myself because I didn't know anything about that process at the time. I ended up going through a place called Seed Studio in China and did a manufacturing run of about 550 units and distributed them over this last year to all of the backers. Now, during that time, there was the other big job of creating the writing platform that goes along with the Choosatron, which I'm currently working on. That, to me, is kind of the big important part. This is kind of the device that gets people interested in that type of content and getting them to want to create more. But it's that platform that then enables them to go to that next step that is what I'm really trying to achieve now, to make sure that kids can create that kind of content and can do things with that. And beyond that, creating other products like this, as hybrids of the physical and the digital, smart devices that aren't in the same category as a fridge telling you what temperature it is, but doing things that are actually opening the eyes of new generations of people and teaching them how to get their hands dirty a little bit. I consider this a maker kit. So they actually get to see what's inside and build it and put it together with their own hands. I've done a couple of classes working with kids so that they got to build their own Choosatrons and actually write their own stories while putting them on. It is Wi-Fi enabled, which then allows transfer wirelessly as well as to be able to enable online features. So I want to thank you for listening to me talk about the Choosatron. And yeah, I'd love to hear any questions you have about it.
Ultimately see your end user or your customer being the education market or the consumer market. What's the price point? What's the revenue model? Can you talk a little bit about the business model?
Sure. Yeah, I have been looking heavily into the education market. I went to a large conference for education this last fall in Chicago to look at kind of how their catalogs work for getting approved products in for teachers to be able to purchase from without having to go out of pocket. Because I know that's a big issue with teachers of what kind of components or kits or educational materials are automatically approved for purchase. So that's one of the lines that I've been looking at and been working with somebody on seeing the viability of that. I did have a few models showed to some people and there was some interest. So right now, to me, it's the writing platform side of it that needs kind of finished polish before I can really make a push on that. In the consumer market, I think there's definitely a lot of space for it. I've taken the Choosatron all over the country and the world, and although it's like, because of kind of its form and what it is, there's a certain amount of like a niche quality to it, but the customers are there, and I think especially with parents wanting to do something a little different for their kids and also themselves. I've been really surprised at just how wide-ranging kind of the age level is for people that are really interested in it. As far as price point, and this is always the trickiest, especially between doing like a low run of a product versus a much larger one. The current bill of materials for like this model right here is about $67. I believe that's I think the $7 on the top part of that might be shipping, or at least a part of that. But yeah, it's under $70, which is still a little high. Although all of the sales so far on it have been like through the Kickstarter and outside of that have been 150 up. So based off that, and what I've been looking for is to see if I can hit under $100 for the kit, and that including, again, the writing software and basically lesson and curriculum materials, both for parents, like activities that they can do with their kids with it, and for teachers. To bring that down, basically, there's a number of ways to do it. I'm working on a second revision for the circuit board with a new chip that's going to eliminate about $12 worth of materials just on replacing the chip. It'll also be a superior component. Moving away from something very time intensive like laser cutting to injection molding. And the printer that's being used is an off-the-shelf thermal printer, but it would be possible to source just the printer head and reduce a lot of the cost of the printer components, integrate the driver into the board, and have that all be kind of a single piece. So that, I believe it could take off another $30 off it, and that's just kind of a ballpark. It could be even more than that, but that would be kind of the goal in terms of scaling.
Do you have any patents on this?
I do not. Everything is open sourced. The software, the firmware, yeah, basically.
What if Mattel gets a hold of your idea then?
I've been, I've talked to a lot of toy companies, or at least not necessarily to sell it, but just kind of as part of the last couple of years of doing this. I've been in pretty good contact with Hasbro. And essentially what I realized early on is this is kind of too out there for them. In the sense that, one, I don't see them taking a chance like this. Two, I'm very interested in other aspects of it in terms of the business plan of making money other than just selling the physical product. Selling stories, having a story store, allowing people to write their own stories and sell them, and taking a percentage of that revenue. I've been looking at a lot of other ways that would be kind of more sustainable while not forcing myself to be stuck dealing purely with hardware side of it. I also wanted to do something that was open and could potentially be a place for people to learn from, both in my journey in getting into manufacturing, getting into development, and kind of on from there.
I really like the idea of the story store, because I'm already thinking gosh, I mean, the opportunities for adult drinking games, the choose your own adventure, murder mystery crowd, adult parties, the burlesque show, kind of get out there a little bit rather than the kids market. I think is very too.
Oh yeah, and you're totally right. We've looked at, or I've looked at coffee shops and bars where you just pay to essentially rent a Choosatron for an hour and have it at your table and play different games with it. Whether they're just kind of a selection of interactive fiction games. We talked about alternate firmware designs, which we can swap again wirelessly, so pretty seamlessly, where it could act more as a game master, where it's taking care of dice rolls and randomly generating event cards, because it can create the materials that you need for a physical game, for a card game or turn-based game.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
First, have you talked to a patent attorney, or are you making assumptions? That's my first question.
Assumptions in
about
what
it
sense?
being open source, so I can't protect anything. Is that an assumption on your part, or have you actually talked?
Oh, I didn't mean that I couldn't. I just wasn't interested in it.
You weren't choosing to.
I'm just not choosing to.
And the second question is, where are the stories stored?
They're stored on an internal memory chip. There's also a micro SD slot, so you can put stories on a card and swap them out. I find that helpful if you've got, if you're doing an event and you want to be able to quickly swap out different kind of story packs. But yeah, you can store about 20 stories on the internal chip. I think you were holding.
I was running your numbers as you were talking about cost of this and that, and you're at $67 minus 7 for shipping, minus 12 if you skin this out, minus 30 more if you skin that out. You're at $18. Does that sound about right?
Wait. Well, it was So let's assume the 67 is not including shipping, that because I think that might have been wrong. Minus $30 would get it to 37, but
12 more in there before the 30.
oh, I'm sorry. I was including those together. I was adding those together. So the minus 30 is kind of about the total I think could be taken off it.
$18 was an amazing number. 30.
Oh yeah.
37 is a pretty
And the thing is, it's really using cheap stuff. And I have some stuff in here that it doesn't need to have. It has an RGB LED because the original ones were clear acrylic. That can go. It has a piezo speaker.
The printing on the adding machine tape is cute, but I'm thinking kids might want to be able to do a little book. Is it possible to stick a thing in and eliminate the printer and just plug into your at-home printer and use it as a vehicle for publishing?
I see what you're saying. Actually, that's going to be a component of the writing software. So from the writing software, being able to export your content as a linear, flippable book, and that a lot of that work's already done, so that you can actually kind of, like you said, create something that's printable and then probably fold the pages over and staple it together. And so yes.
Maybe speak a little bit about the Kickstarter, especially emphasis on the cost estimation problems that people are in.
Oh yes, that is a fun one. I was extremely obsessive about spreadsheeting all of the costs with lots of margin. So I had a very, very complicated sheet that I put together as I was building the rewards. Had been talking to people in China, talking to other local partners in hardware, and basically once I had like broken down the rewards, I'd figured out the shipping per weight that my distributor, was going to be using, and also, do I actually need this? Is this? Yeah. Okay. And then also all the fees taken out by Kickstarter, by Amazon at the time, and what I was able to do is put in virtual estimates of numbers as far as what people might pledge. So like kind of the worst possible way where they only pledge for the least marked up item. I did a lot with perceived value on the cases. So originally there was a blue acrylic and a clear acrylic, and I was going to do a wood right off the bat, but I didn't know if people would think that a clear acrylic or a wood would feel more valuable. So I just held back on the wood one and talked about it and waited to see how they reacted. I had the clear acrylic $10 more than the blue, but it cost the exact same for me. And then the wood I ended up putting out for $10 more than the clear, and then people are like, oh, that's the one I want, and then they'd put in another $10. The thermal paper was also a big one for markup because it's absolutely dirt cheap. So that was an easy one to be able to make up some of the other costs. So it was a lot of work going into that to make sure. And at the end of the day, like I said, it was in the probably with the shipping then in $70. But I was selling them each for like the early birds. There were a handful for 140, and then 150, 160. I did a set of pre-orders after that were all 160 and up, including a bunch that were at 200. So it definitely covered it all. Of the 75,000, I think little under 35,000 went into actually making the units. So having them manufactured, the PCBs, all the parts, having them mailed out to people, and then the rest of the 35 was to cover like previous expenses, travel, events, all of that kind of stuff.
I sense you're an artist at heart.
Yeah.
I'm a visual artist. I would take this gentleman's advice to contact a patent attorney. Artists and business, it's an uncomfortable field. Right?
Oh,
My
no,
son
yeah.
once asked, somebody asked him, what does freelance mean? And he says, oh, that means mommy gives away her artwork for free.
Clever kid.
I changed my business model watching the Joy movie, if you don't protect your intellectual property, like Springboard for the Arts can help you with the legal aspect.
Mhm.
If you don't protect that, somewhere down the line, somebody's going to take your big, beautiful, broad idea and maybe even turn it around and create a lawsuit against you.
No, that's an interesting point. And I should say I do have an attorney, and we have had like the beginnings of that conversation. I'll admit I've also been lazy about pursuing it, which is probably no surprise. And part of it stems from like the Choosatron is kind of and not that this is like a good excuse, but it's kind of one component of kind of a lot of different things like this that I want to be doing, and it's and yeah, like I want to make sure that this kind of specific project is a lot about giving back, and I don't want to get weird about locking things down. But I think you're right, at least on the intellectual property point that
Investors will want that too.
yeah, which is true. So yes, it's a good point. I probably needed a little kick to actually go ahead and figure that out.
What do you estimate the total lifetime value for your customers would be, and then what's your customer acquisition cost?
Total lifetime value, as far as purchasing like the Choosatron, I've been seeing like people have been using it for, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding the question, but it seems about like kind of 2-3 years is like, because when you get kind of that physical device for like one kid, but again, like part of that is transitioning them like over to kind of digital products, and also along with like the story store, like mobile products, so that they can like keep playing stories that they have and kind of the digital side, and treating that a bit like an arcade. As far as like calculating the numbers for acquiring customers, that I do not know. That is something that is like I understand the concept of it, but not something that I've known how to figure out myself.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about like the unit itself. I'm wondering if you already have wireless connectivity, and you've used the Arduino, because I've used the Arduino, and so like Bean and all that stuff. Could you just like set up Bluetooth and then have it so that most TVs have internet connection, so you could like go through that, maybe have the Bluetooth working so it transmits to the USB, and the USB connects to the television, so that you don't actually need the paper process. I mean, it's going to cost for them to keep taking supplies to the paper, and I understand this is maybe moving more towards console versus a little unit, and I get there's going to be some, okay, we knock it on the head at this point, otherwise it just becomes a PlayStation.
Well, one of the problems specifically there is, going to Bluetooth doesn't necessarily help with costs, and most TVs I don't know that they're capable of acting as that kind of hub.
There's that, or there's your local network as well.
Yeah, and that it can already kind of function as. It's where you could see like a real-time play on a computer system. Because one thing I've thought about is like presentations and being able to like show a story being played in real time on the projector, because it's telling the network like where it is in the story and what's happening, and even like having groups of people voting on choices, stuff like that. I think like going to that level, then it's once the paper is gone, then the purpose of having the device disappears, and then it all just goes to an application. Which again, is something I'm also pursuing, like a mobile application, but I feel like those are very, very separate, and yeah, they kind of negate each other if they get too close in functionality.
For the price for a roll of paper?
A roll of 85-foot paper, which provides anywhere from Oh, geez.
Half a story?
Oh no, 85 feet will give you, I mean, here's one play, and a play could be like a foot, it could be like 2.5 feet. So I mean, you could get like 60 to 80 plays per roll, and a roll would be 20 to 25 cents.
Okay, so fairly inexpensive, but then in terms of recyclability and environmental, you know, you've got a lot of people and they're all using this product specifically for that use. That's a lot of rolls.
Possibly, but I'm not sure it makes much of a dent considering like anything you purchase during the day is a Choosatron story, only it's worthless. You know, like, because people have said that to me where it's like, oh, well, that's terrible for the environment. And I was like, I know, right? Like books.
I know.
Like,
And so they do, that's another reason why, you know, like a lot of people go with Kindle and whatever.
yeah, and part of it too is like, but it's also worth looking at like why is that experience valuable? Like why is it better to touch something? And the thing is, you can have the same game presented or same experience presented in numerous different forms, and functionally it's the same, but it works on some and it doesn't work on others. You know, playing an emulated Nintendo game on your phone sounds really fun for people that grew up playing Nintendo, but it's absolutely awful. And it's also a difference in the social experience of playing. If someone's playing a Choosatron game on their phone, like when you have your phone up, it's kind of an implicit like, this is my bubble right now, and it's really rude to enter that space and to look at what I'm doing. And what I've loved about something like this is that when somebody's playing, it pulls people in. And like even the next person waiting in line who's a complete stranger, I've seen before where they just start like looking over, they start reading it, and then they catch themselves giving the other person advice and telling them like, oh, you should do that, like, you know, be careful. And it gets people to actually start playing what originally was meant as an individual experience and doing it together. And like, I think there's a lot of value in that. And I think like a little bit of the proof in that pudding is how kind of the new like Internet of Things technologies are bringing things back into real space. Because I think smartphones are great. I absolutely love them. But I also don't think that they should be the window in which we view the world. I think they're a great tool in which to connect and interact with the world, but I want this to be like my augmented reality view screen, not this. And so anything that like brings me back into that physical space and provides me information in that physical space, I think like is more compelling just because we're physical things and we like to touch stuff.
Okay, I've got two things. First is why the name?
Choosatron?
Yeah, like we're all sitting in this room listening to this, and the second is like scalability. How do you go present this to everybody? And having to present it, like how many people can you physically be in front of if you're not a gamer, and I may or may not be interested in that? I'm concerned about the name and the scalability.
What's the concern on the name?
Well, the name is not something that you would just hear or see and know what it means. Like Choosatron, like, okay, what is that? That's the first question. And then you have to be in front of me to present it. So how scalable is this?
Well, I'd argue that I don't need to be in front of people to present it. Over the last couple of years, between like, I mean, I think the Kickstarter is some evidence of that. Like it was just a video. It was just information on this webpage, and a lot of people were able to get that. And from the events that I've done, it's, I mean, I've just been sending them places. I haven't had to be places for people to be able to go and try them and kind of get that sense. So part of my strategy has been having them at different high volume events and letting that kind of generate the attention and press. And so far it's been very successful in that. I've got a few permanent installations around the world, one in Berlin and other places, and that generates a lot of interest that comes back to me. As far as the name, I've always personally been somebody that doesn't worry too much about names. I mean, I do a little, but I also feel like if the name is something that doesn't already push someone's mind into a particular place, it's kind of a blank slate to make it yours. And like, if you can be that presence with that name, then people are going to start identifying it with you. And again, like whether or not I've been successful at that, I guess it's up for debate. But I'm curious about like actually hearing more about that specifically, because I mean, I don't know necessarily much about like the philosophy of designing product names in business, which is probably a huge field.
So the reason I'm asking that specifically is because I named my company, and I've been an entrepreneur for 6 years, and after 5 years, no one knew what my company meant, and once I changed the name, instantly sales increased.
Interesting. May I ask what it was previously and then now?
Yeah, Briella Ariane was the previous name, and now I just use my name because everybody associated. So I'm an international best-selling author, so my company was associated automatically with my name. But if I did Briella Ariane and all of my products and services, people were like, "What the hell is that?"
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just concerned for you because no one knows exactly what that means. If you chose maybe something a little bit more, I don't know, different, where it was self-explanatory, your sales might increase.
Possibly.
Startups need favor.
I
You think it does?
and when and actually I basically rebranded my company. The name is still Monkey with a Mustache, but that's not something that's only ever seen in legal documents. I've branded for the last few years as Jerrytron, and I've been building my brand around that as a game designer, as a speaker, as somebody that's creating physical digital hybrid products and installation work and stuff like that. And so in that sense, I get what you're saying, because that brand has worked really well for me in terms of generating that kind of work and generating those kinds of relationships. Whether or not Choosatron is kind of a failure on that end, I don't know.
I would say talk to a brand strategist or brand development type person to get some feedback on that. I personally like it's kind of generational, but the Choosatron kind of harkens back to the 60s and 70s when you used to have these little robots.
Yeah.
They just worked with a battery or something. They march around and stuff, and you think, well, this is high tech. The Choosatron seems like it harkens back to an old school kind of game.
Yeah, that was kind of the idea, is like the high tech, low tech. And I mean, so far, I am good or not, I may be locked in because I have a couple years of a lot of press and a lot of stuff online that's very, very connected to that name now. You had a question?
I like the name because choose is what your game is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is very descriptive, and Tron just makes me think, like you said,
A device, a thing, a
grandma,
robot.
I'm grandma, I'm thinking Tron means something electronic.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that it's a very good grandma toy to have at grandma's house, because I'm also a teacher, but I want my kids to I'm not getting any kind of video game at my house.
Mm-hmm.
That's not gonna happen, because that's what they get there, you know. When they go to grandma's house, they should have something that's gonna involve their mind, but that would involve the whole family.
Mm-hmm.
And that'd be something we could sit around and we could do.
Yeah.
It's still electronic.
Yeah,
So it's
actually,
still cool.
I could just.
Graphic is a good graphic in the front to relate to.
Oh yeah,
And they can make it.
yeah. As long as people can just. Is it working?
We have time for one or two more questions, and then we'll start to wrap up.
Come on, start up. There we go. Yeah, any more questions?
So what specifically are you looking for from this community? What can we do for you to help you get to the next level?
So in terms of where I'm at with the product, after the Kickstarter and after delivery of the product, that was when I kind of, went back into hibernation on kind of what the Choosatron is and what I'm going to be doing next, and as well as I shifted focus and put a lot of effort into building my own personal brand, because I was realizing just how much I needed kind of that solidified, and that was going to help the Choosatron. Where I got to was the writing platform was something that I realized was going to need a lot more attention. Was going to need something, an infusion of whether that's like time or money or some kind of resources in order to build out that system properly, because it was already an obvious like mistake for me to do everything myself. Which, again, it's like one of those things you look back on of like doing a whole Kickstarter yourself. Oh, you're going to do a physical product. That's a great idea. Oh, you're going to write all the firmware yourself and a software platform? Good job, buddy. So it's one of those mistakes that you make, and you kind of know you're making it, but you also don't know any way around it in order to learn the things that you need to know in order to do better. So like I kind of brute forced my way through, but unfortunately there's just only so far you can go with that. So in order to pursue the educational market, in order to pursue like a distributor for sales like ThinkGeek or different platforms that kind of have a love for the a little strange, I need to finish the development platform, which is being written as a Chrome application. The idea being that it's very, very cross-platform, but still something that runs, as an application on your system, and doesn't require you to have the browser open, but then also able to connect to lower functions, so talking to it through USB or sending calls up online. One thing I wanted to make sure with the Choosatron is that you can do everything locally without a wireless network. I get really frustrated with products that are taking advantage of wireless, but then making it a requirement when there are plenty of use cases of being offline and not like wanting to necessarily take advantage of those things. You should be able to write a story and put it on the Choosatron without having wireless at all. So that platform is the biggest component. I need to do a new iteration of the PCB, the board, to put on a new chip. That's a very pretty low cost and easy thing to do, so I'm not very worried about that. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for right now is I need to get the, whether it's investment or partners to finish the web development coding for the platform. And also curriculum is kind of a big piece of that.
Do you have a sales plan, sales distribution plan? I mean, do you plan on just making it an online sales? Do you plan, or do you visualize having a sales force? Or kind of getting back to the customer acquisition?
Yeah. As far as like, and especially with kind of the physical product, I've been looking at partners for the supply chain. So like, I don't know if you know Black Box, the new company that Max Temkin of Cards Against Humanity is launching, which is kind of to solve a lot of those problems. So looking at that, looking at some other alternatives. And partners that are going to actually help take a lot of the load off me in terms of warehousing and actually dealing with distribution. Because again, I need to offload some of that, if only for me to be able to focus on the digital side and sales that way for like digital stories, for other components related to that, that I don't have to deal with physical goods, but are kind of a natural extension of it. So that's what I'm looking for in terms of my own personal focus on it, and then that supply chain feeding into the educational market, and then wherever kind of regular sales end up going.